Hello. That was all Jasmine Porter said as she stepped up to the polished oak counter, clutching her school folder with both hands. The teller barely looked up. Oak Ridge Bank was quiet that Monday morning, its marble floors gleaming like mirrors under cold fluorescent lights. The walls, adorned with framed certificates and images of past bank presidents, every one of them white and smiling, stood as silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Jasmine adjusted the collar of her school uniform, her hands trembling just enough to betray the nerves she hid behind practiced poise. The scholarship check rested neatly inside her folder. $5,000. She had earned it. Top of her class. Perfect grades. Mathlete captain. Winner of the statewide STEM Excellence Award. Every step leading to this moment had been paved with long nights and early mornings. Her mother had offered to come with her, but Jasmine had said no. "I've got it, Mom," she'd insisted that morning, her voice clear with resolve. "It's time I handle things on my own." But as the teller finally met her eyes, something in his expression shifted. He took the check from her, held it up to the light, and frowned as if it might bleed falsehoods. Jasmine felt the quiet eyes of the bank press in. She was the only black person in the lobby, a teenage girl in a sea of tailored suits and crisp collars. "A $5,000 deposit?" he asked, tone flat but louder than it needed to be. "Yes, sir," Jasmine said, her voice soft, calm. She handed over her student ID and the award letter, carefully printed and sealed by the Westridge Academy Foundation. "It's my academic scholarship. All the documentation is here." The teller's frown deepened. Without a word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into a frosted glass office behind the counter. A moment later, a woman emerged, Victoria Hayes, the branch manager. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed, every hair in place, her lipstick the color of polished steel. She moved with the confident briskness of someone used to being obeyed. Victoria took one look at Jasmine and sighed. "We've had quite a few issues with fraudulent checks recently," she said, not even pretending to mask the suspicion in her voice. Jasmine stood up straighter. "This isn't fraudulent. I want it for academic merit. It's real." "I'm sure you believe that," Victoria replied, and just like that, it was clear. This wasn't about the check. It was about Jasmine, about how she looked, how she didn't belong. Victoria took the check and documents without another word and walked off, leaving Jasmine alone at the counter. The minutes began to stretch. Customers came and went. Conversations floated around her, loan approvals, mortgage refinances, small talk about the weather. But Jasmine remained standing there, unacknowledged, unseen. The silence around her was not quiet. It was heavy, charged. Whispers started. Eyes darted toward her. A man in a navy blazer glanced up from his paperwork and frowned. A woman shifted uncomfortably and clutched her purse a little tighter. Jasmine looked at the clock on the wall. 20 minutes. Still no one had returned. She felt the heat rise in her chest, the prickling shame of being scrutinized like a problem instead of a person. Her mouth went dry. Her phone, she realized too late, was in her locker at school. She had no way to call her mom. No way to leave. No way to prove anything beyond the papers they already held in their hands. The walls of the bank, which had seemed so impressive when she walked in, now felt like they were closing in. From across the room, she heard Victoria's voice, low, conspiratorial, speaking to another employee. "She says it's a scholarship," Victoria muttered. "But we can't just take anyone's word for it. Standards are standards. Anyone." The word hit like a slap. Jasmine's eyes burned, but she blinked the tears away. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She had worked too hard for this. But in that moment, in the middle of that immaculate bank, Jasmine Porter no longer felt like a top student or a rising star. She felt like a suspect. And that was when something shifted inside her. Not just the hurt, but the understanding. This wasn't just about her. This was about every student who would walk into a room and be doubted before they spoke. This was about the burden she had always carried and hadn't yet named. And though she didn't yet know it, this would not be the last time she stood accused simply for daring to achieve. This was just the beginning. Jasmine Porter was still standing by the counter when a tall man in a gray suit with a Bluetooth headset tapped his black Amex on the glass and gave her a look like she was in the way. She stepped aside reflexively, as if she were furniture that needed moving. The man didn't say a word to her, but when the teller greeted him with a smile and a "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," Jasmine felt the sting in her chest deepen. Same teller, same desk, same time of day. But one of them was a customer, and the other, a child with brown skin and ambition, was an anomaly that had to be checked and double-checked. Victoria Hayes finally returned after what felt like half an hour, her heels clicking confidently across the floor. The check was still in her hand, her lips pressed into a line of polite disdain. "We've contacted the issuing organization for verification," she said, loud enough that the nearby customers turned their heads. "Until then, I'm afraid we'll need you to wait." Jasmine stared at her, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you just deposit it? I brought everything." Victoria tilted her head slightly, the way one might when speaking to a slow child. "You have to understand, we can't be too careful. These types of checks, well, we've had incidents. People creating fake awards, fake IDs. It happens more often than you think." "But I go to Westridge Academy," Jasmine said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "I earned this." She stopped, realizing the futility of defending her existence. "You don't need to raise your voice," Victoria said sharply. "We're just doing our job." From behind, someone chuckled. Jasmine turned to see an older white woman, perhaps in her 60s, seated on one of the lobby's sleek leather benches. She wore pearls and a lavender scarf and held a poodle in her lap. "I told my husband this neighborhood was changing," the woman said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Now look." Jasmine's ears burned. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The words were there, but they stuck in her throat, heavy with fear and humiliation. A younger teller, perhaps no older than 22, looked up from the far end of the counter. She hesitated, then slowly walked over, her badge reading Maya, Associate Services. Her eyes flicked between Jasmine and Victoria. "Miss Hayes," Maya said quietly, "I think we might be handling this a little differently than we would with." Victoria turned sharply. "Maya, thank you. But I believe I know how to manage my branch." Jasmine heard it. Everyone heard it. The message was clear: don't question me. Especially not on this. Maya glanced at Jasmine, offering a tiny, silent apology with her eyes, then stepped back. And Jasmine was alone again. That was when the door opened. It was a tall woman in a tailored navy suit with matching pumps and a sleek leather briefcase. She moved like someone who had run meetings that shaped cities. The sound of her heels wasn't just rhythmic, it was deliberate. Dr. Naomi Porter didn't need to look around. She already knew. She spotted her daughter instantly, standing frozen in place, eyes glassy and posture too stiff for a girl so young. "Jasmine?" Her voice was calm but laced with urgency. "What's going on?" Jasmine couldn't speak. She just looked at her mother with a desperate kind of relief, as if she'd been holding her breath for an hour and could finally exhale. Naomi turned to the counter. "Excuse me," she said to Victoria, whose expression now flickered with something approaching discomfort. "Is there a reason my daughter has been made to stand here for nearly 40 minutes over a verified scholarship deposit?" Victoria straightened her blouse. "We were simply exercising caution. These sorts of deposits, without a guardian present." "She's 14, Naomi cut in, her voice sharper now. "Old enough to deposit a check into a joint account we both signed for. You're holding her here as if she forged it herself." "I can assure you," Victoria began, "there was no discrimination here. We're required to." Naomi pulled a business card from her wallet and laid it flat on the counter. "I'm the Senior Financial Compliance Director at Mason & Rowe, one of the largest equity firms on the Eastern Seaboard. I can tell you exactly what your requirements are. You verified nothing. You profiled my daughter." The poodle lady in the lobby made a small gasp. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Naomi didn't stop. Her voice was quiet, but her words hit like thunder. "You saw a black girl walk into this bank with a $5,000 check and assumed it had to be a scam. Not because of policy, not because of protocol. Because you looked at her and couldn't imagine that someone like her could earn something like this." "That's not true," Victoria said, though her voice had lost its edge. Naomi stepped closer, eyes hard now. "Then why didn't the man with the Amex have to verify anything? Why didn't you call the issuing institution for him?" Victoria looked down. "This isn't about race." Naomi leaned in, and her voice dropped to a near whisper. "It's always about race when the same rules apply differently depending on who's standing at the counter." For the first time since Jasmine had entered the bank, the room was completely silent. Jasmine finally spoke, her voice small but steady. "Can we please just deposit the check now?" Naomi looked at her daughter, then back at Victoria. "Yes, you're going to deposit it. Right now. And then you're going to apologize to her." Victoria hesitated. "Do it," Naomi said, voice ironclad. I'm sorry, Victoria mumbled, barely audible. Louder, Naomi said. Victoria looked at Jasmine. I'm sorry, Miss Porter. I apologize for the delay. Jasmine nodded, not because it was enough, but because she was ready to leave. As Victoria completed the deposit, Naomi turned to her daughter and gently took her hand. Next time, Jasmine whispered, can I still go alone? Naomi's eyes welled slightly, but she smiled. Yes, but you'll know what to watch for. They walked out of Oak Ridge Bank into the sharp light of early afternoon. The sky was a dazzling blue, but Jasmine's shoulders sagged under an invisible weight. She should have felt triumphant. She had stood her ground, or at least stayed standing, and her mother had swept in like a storm of justice. But there was no victory in being seen as guilty before being heard. They reached the car, a quiet black sedan parked beneath a flowering maple, and Jasmine slid into the passenger seat. She stared out the window as her mother adjusted the rearview mirror and started the engine. Naomi Porter didn't speak right away. She understood silence. Not the kind that lingers awkwardly, but the kind that grows roots, stretching down into soil watered by centuries of being doubted, dismissed, delayed. She didn't rush her daughter. Not yet. It wasn't until they were halfway home that Jasmine finally asked, why did she look at me like that? Naomi glanced over. Because she didn't see you. Not the real you. But I gave her everything, Jasmine said, her voice cracking. My ID. My school letter. Everything. I know, baby. Naomi's grip on the steering wheel tightened. But some people look at a young black girl and decide she's a problem before she even speaks. Jasmine stared ahead. I didn't know it could feel like this. That's because until now, most of your life's been in classrooms that praised you. Competitions that rewarded you. You've been where your excellence protected you. I thought it would always be enough. Naomi exhaled through her nose. Jasmine, I need you to understand something. Your excellence will never protect you from ignorance. It won't stop someone from thinking you don't belong, but it will give you the power to confront it, to expose it, and to never believe it about yourself. Jasmine turned toward her mother. Did this ever happen to you? Naomi's eyes never left the road, but her voice lowered. Plenty of times. She paused. First time I applied for a loan to start my firm, the banker asked me if my husband would be co-signing. I wasn't married, had perfect credit, a master's in finance. And he looked me in the eye and asked if I was sure I understood how debt worked. Jasmine blinked. I was 30, Naomi continued. And I smiled. Just like you did today. Not because I was okay, but because I was angry and I knew I couldn't show it. Jasmine turned back to the window. I hated standing there. I know. And everyone was watching like they already knew I was lying. They were. They drove in silence for a moment. But you weren't lying, Naomi added. You were standing in your truth. And every single person who watched you today, they saw what integrity looks like when it's tested. Jasmine let her head fall back against the seat. She wasn't used to feeling so small. At school, she was someone, student council rep, debate finalist, on track for Ivy League. Her classmates asked for help on math problems. Her teachers praised her writing. But in that bank, none of that mattered. She was a problem, a question mark that needed verifying. She thought of Victoria's voice. We can't just let anyone walk in and expect to be treated like they belong. Anyone. That word echoed in her mind like a cruel riddle. Do you think they'll treat the next black girl who comes in better? Jasmine asked. Naomi didn't answer right away. She signaled to make a turn, then pulled the car to a stop in front of their home, a stately brick house in the heart of Oak Ridge, with trimmed hedges and a plaque by the mailbox that read the Porters. She shifted the car into park and looked at her daughter. I think, Naomi said slowly, they'll remember today. And I think next time, someone in that room will hesitate before repeating what happened. Jasmine looked up at the house but didn't move. I didn't do anything wrong, she whispered. No, baby, Naomi said, her voice steady. But you did something right. You endured. They went inside, and Naomi made tea the way her own mother used to peppermint leaves, honey, a splash of lemon. Jasmine sat at the kitchen table, watching the steam curl into the air. Her mother sat across from her, both hands wrapped around her cup. The television was on in the living room, the volume low. A local news anchor was discussing a town hall meeting about school zoning in nearby neighborhoods. Jasmine wasn't listening until she heard the words Oak Ridge Bank. Her head snapped toward the screen. Earlier today, a teenage girl attempting to deposit a scholarship check was allegedly detained at an Oak Ridge Bank branch, the anchor said. Sources say the incident may have involved racial profiling. We've reached out to the bank for comment. Jasmine's mouth fell open. How did it? Naomi turned the volume down further. Someone in that bank must have called it in. Or maybe Maya. She looked like she wanted to say something. Everyone's going to know, Jasmine murmured. Good, Naomi said. Let them know. Let them see what's hiding behind the customer service smiles and polished glass. Jasmine wasn't sure whether to feel exposed or vindicated. Maybe both. Her phone buzzed in her backpack. She pulled it out and saw a flood of messages from classmates. Hey, are you okay? I saw your name on Twitter. What happened? Jasmine, this isn't right. Want me to help write something? Maybe for the school paper? Jasmine stared at the screen, and something new began to settle in her chest, something harder than fear, more solid than shame. Resolve. She opened her notes app and typed 3 words. I walked in. Then another line. And they looked at me like I didn't belong. She wasn't sure what she was writing. A poem? A letter? A statement? But she kept going. And this time, she didn't feel small at all. By morning, Jasmine Porter's words had traveled farther than she ever expected. Her late-night post, a quiet, trembling truth typed in the dark, had been shared over 2,000 times before breakfast. She hadn't used hashtags. She hadn't tagged the bank. She hadn't even written it like it was meant for anyone but herself. But truth, especially when spoken plainly, has a way of catching fire. By the time she walked into Westridge Academy, eyes followed her. Not with the usual admiration for her grades or envy of her debate wins, but with a new kind of attention. Some people looked at her like she was a hero. Others looked away, uncomfortable. Her best friend Zara met her at her locker with a tight hug and a simple, whispered, I read it. Every word. I didn't mean for it to blow up, Jasmine said, voice low. That's why it did, Zara replied. You didn't write it to go viral. You wrote it to survive. That afternoon, the school's diversity council reached out. The student newspaper asked to interview her. A teacher left a handwritten note in her locker. You walked in with courage. Thank you for reminding us all that it matters. But not every voice was kind. By third period, screenshots of online comments began circling. This is just another race card stunt. Why would a teenager be depositing a check like that alone anyway? Maybe she misunderstood the situation. And then, sounds like the bank did its job. Jasmine sat on the edge of the cafeteria bench, phone buzzing nonstop, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The swell of attention didn't feel like victory, it felt like a spotlight. And spotlights were hot, unforgiving. But still, she didn't delete the post. Because for every voice that tried to minimize her story, a dozen more had replied with their own. A college senior wrote, same thing happened to me at 17. Honors student. They thought I stole my own financial aid refund. A teacher wrote, I once watched my student get treated like a criminal for buying a graphing calculator. Stories poured in. Quiet wounds brought into the light. That evening, Naomi sat beside Jasmine on the porch, sipping tea again. The sky was streaked with orange, and the air smelled like earth and coming rain. You started something, Naomi said gently. I don't know if I can finish it, Jasmine whispered. Her mother smiled, proud and steady. You don't have to. You just have to keep walking. And Jasmine knew this wasn't just her burden anymore. It was her story, but it was never hers alone. The official apology came 3 days later, wrapped in corporate language and thinly veiled discomfort. We at Oak Ridge Bank regret the incident that occurred involving Miss Jasmine Porter. While we maintain that our staff followed standard procedures, we acknowledge that the experience did not reflect our commitment to inclusivity and respect. Jasmine read it twice. There was no mention of race, no acknowledgement of what it felt like to be stared at, questioned, detained, not because she lacked proof, but because she lacked the look of someone who belonged. It was the kind of apology meant to calm headlines, not heal harm. But something had shifted since that day in the bank. Jasmine wasn't the same girl who had stood frozen in the lobby, clutching her folder like a shield. Now, when she walked into school, teachers gave her knowing nods. Students who had never spoken to her before asked thoughtful questions. Even Maya, the quiet teller who had hesitated to intervene, found Jasmine's email through the school's website and wrote a message that ended with, Next time, I'll speak louder. You gave me courage to do better. Courage. That word echoed in Jasmine's mind. She had always thought of courage as something loud, marches, speeches, protests with megaphones. But now she knew it could also look like silence held steady, like staying upright when the room wants you to shrink, like writing the truth, not to win, but just to be heard. The local paper ran a feature. Excellence Interrupted, a scholar's fight for respect in Oak Ridge. Her photo appeared beside her story. No smile, just clear eyes and a gaze that didn't flinch. It stirred the community. Some called to praise her. Others called the school board to complain. And still, Jasmine wrote. She filled notebooks with reflections, sketches of poems, fragments of thoughts that made sense only when read aloud. Her English teacher encouraged her to submit to a national youth writing contest. She almost didn't. But the day before the deadline, she printed out her piece, clipped it neatly, and wrote a title in bold at the top. Hello. I walked in. Weeks passed. Spring crept into Oak Ridge. Jasmine kept up with her studies, her competitions, her friendships. But something fundamental had changed. She was no longer trying to prove she belonged. She already knew she did. Then, one bright morning in April, an envelope arrived. Cream-colored, embossed lettering. She opened it with trembling fingers. Congratulations. You've been selected as a national finalist for the Young Voices Writing Award. Her piece would be published. She'd been invited to read it aloud in Washington, D.C. That night, she sat on the same porch with her mother, the sky dark and humming with stars. Naomi reached over, took Jasmine's hand. I'm proud of you, she said softly. Jasmine looked up at the sky. You said my excellence wouldn't protect me. Naomi nodded. That's still true. But it gave me a voice, Jasmine added. And I used it. Naomi smiled. Yes, she said. And now, so will others. In the quiet that followed, Jasmine thought back to the girl standing alone in that bank. The one who wasn't sure if the world would believe her. Now she knew. She didn't need permission to be believed. She had her voice. And she would keep walking, with the quiet kind of courage that changes everything. And that was Jasmine Porter's story. A 14-year-old girl who didn't raise her voice, because she didn't have to. She let her presence speak. She let her silence challenge the noise. And when the system tried to make her feel small, she didn't shrink. She wrote. She rose. She remembered who she was. And reminded the world, too. Because sometimes, change doesn't begin with protest signs or headlines. Sometimes, it begins when one girl walks into a room they said she didn't belong in, and refuses to walk out quietly. If this story moved you, say something below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us a time when you stood tall, even when it hurt. You never know who needs to hear your voice today. If you believe stories like this matter, leave a comment, tap like, and don't forget to subscribe. We're building a space where truth gets told, and where justice has a voice. Thanks for being here. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other. And as always, stay brave, stay kind, and stay awake. Goodbye for now.